Fermentation effect during beer fermentation. How wort evolved into fresh and tasty beer. What kind of material changes are performed in the wort in the fermenter? With all kinds of questions, let's start the beer fermentation process. Fermentation is the yeast converting the glucose in the wort into ethanol and CO gas. Before fermentation, the cooled wort needs to be transferred to a container with added yeast. Final fermentation is done through primary fermentation, secondary fermentation, and conditioning stages. This process generates a lot of heat, and the tank is constantly cooled to maintain the proper temperature. 1. Fermentation effect from primary fermentation. Yeast growth occurs in primary fermentation. The primary stage of fermentation begins when yeast is introduced into the cooled wort. Yeast quickly uses available oxygen to produce an important compound for culture expansion. When the oxygen disappears, the yeast switches to the anaerobic stage. Most of the wort sugar is reduced to ethanol and carbon dioxide. 2. Fermentation effect produced by secondary fermentation. Diacetyl reduction occurs during secondary fermentation. Secondary fermentation refers to the stage of fermentation after most of the sugar in the wort is consumed. Fermentation rate drops dramatically and most of the sugar is eventually used up. Some secondary metabolites are converted by yeast. As the alcohol content increases and sugar and nutrients are depleted, the yeast begins to flocculate and settle. 3. Adjustment stage. This stage is when final gravity is reached and the tank cools to refrigeration temperature, 31 to 38 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 to 3 degrees Celsius. Yeast continues to flocculate and settle, reducing various undesirable flavor compounds to condition the beer. The effects of the conditioning phase include: most of the yeast is removed from the beer, reducing the alcohol-stimulating taste. Reduction of sulfur compounds, diacetyl and acetaldehyde for more stable beer flavor. The above is the relevant content of the fermentation process in craft beer. Feel free to browse our news blog and discuss with us.